I'd just come back from my Sunday morning at church, a bouquet of daisies from the farmer's market tucked under my arm, the scent of fresh petals mixing with the crisp fall air. My little house in the suburbs, with its chipped white fence and creaky porch swing, felt like the same safe haven it had been for decades. I was 68, a retired nurse, and this place, my place, was where I'd raised a daughter who wasn't mine by blood but by every beat of my heart. Or so I thought. That morning, as I pushed open the front door, the daisies still in hand, I heard voices, not the kind you expect, like a neighbor dropping by or the radio left on. No, these were sharp, confident, like they owned the hardwood floors I'd polished for years. I froze, my fingers tightening around the bouquet, and then I saw them. My daughter Lillian standing in my living room, her arms crossed, her auburn hair pulled back tight. Beside her was Nathan, her husband, in a pressed polo shirt, pointing at my dining room table like he was measuring it for new owners. And there, scribbling notes on a clipboard, was a woman in a blazer, her heels clicking against my floor, a real estate agent. I stood there, invisible in my own home, as Lillian's voice cut through the air like a knife. "This is perfect for our family," she said, her tone bright, like she was selling a dream. "Plenty of space for a playroom once we clear it out." Nathan nodded, his eyes scanning the walls where my late husband's old medical journals still sat on the shelf. "Yeah," he added, "the backyard's big enough for a swing set. No stairs either. It's ideal." I felt my chest tighten, like the air had been sucked out of the room. The daisies slipped a little in my grip, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Then Lillian turned, her eyes meeting mine for the briefest second, and she didn't even flinch. "Oh, Mom," she said, like she'd just noticed me standing in my own doorway. "We were going to tell you, but come on, let's be real. You're done soon, right? You don't need all this space anymore. Done soon." Those words hit me like a slap, cold and deliberate. My daughter, the girl I'd raised since she was a toddler, the one I'd bandaged knees for, stayed up late with through heartbreaks, the one I'd poured every ounce of my love into, she was standing in my home, planning my funeral while I was still breathing. Nathan chimed in, his voice smooth, as if he'd rehearsed it. "It just makes sense, Martha. We're thinking of you. This house is too much for you to handle alone now. Too much for me. My house, the one I'd paid off with years of night shifts at the hospital, the one where I'd hung Christmas lights for Lillian every December, where I'd taught her to bake her first batch of cookies on that very counter they were eyeing for their imaginary kids. They didn't even have a child yet, just a vision board and a hunger for what wasn't theirs. The real estate agent shifted uncomfortably, her pen pausing. "So your mother's on board with the timing?" she asked, glancing at me, then quickly away. Lillian smiled, that polished smile she'd perfected over the years. "Oh, absolutely. Mom wants what's best for us, don't you, Mom?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat felt like it was closing, but not from tears. It was something deeper, like my body was refusing to let their words settle. I set the daisies on the counter, slow and careful, and walked to my armchair, the one with the faded quilt draped over it, the one Lillian used to curl up in when she was little, reading her picture books. I sat down, and they just kept talking. Lillian opened my kitchen cabinets, pointing out the great storage like she was on some home renovation show. Nathan gestured at the wall where I kept a framed photo of my late husband, Paul, in his nurse's scrubs. "This could all come down," he said. "Open up the space." No one asked if I was okay. No one stopped to see the way my hands gripped the armrests, my knuckles white. They just kept going, chattering about paint colors and closing dates, until finally the agent said she'd follow up with paperwork. They left, their voices fading down the driveway, and I was alone. Just me, the hum of the fridge, and the dent in the dining table where Lillian once carved her initials when she was 8, thinking she'd get in trouble but laughing when I just hugged her instead. That night, I didn't sleep. I poured a glass of chamomile tea, turned off every light, and sat in the dark, staring at that table. My heart wasn't breaking, not exactly. It was something quieter, heavier, like a stone settling in my chest. I realized I'd never been seen, not really. To Lillian, I was a means to an end, a stepping stone to her perfect life. And to Nathan, I was just an obstacle, an old woman taking up space they wanted for themselves. They thought I was done, that my story was over. But they were wrong. That was the moment I stopped being afraid, not of dying, not of losing the house, but of letting them write the end of my life for me. I wasn't going to let them erase me. Not my home, not my memories, not the woman who'd fought for every brick of this place. By the time the sun rose, I wasn't sad anymore. I was awake, and I was ready to make sure they'd never see me coming. Oh, and before we go on, if this story's hitting you, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a comment too. Let me know where you're watching from. It means the world to hear from you. The morning after Lillian and Nathan walked through my house like it was already theirs, I woke up at 5, same as always. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. I made my coffee, black, no sugar, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where Lillian had stood, her voice still echoing in my head. "You're done soon, right?" I wasn't sad anymore. Something else had settled in, something steady, cold, like the steel I used to handle in the hospital when I was a nurse, prepping instruments for surgery. I wasn't going to let them bury me in their plans. I'd spent my life caring for others. 30 years as a nurse, stitching wounds, holding hands through pain, staying calm when the world was falling apart. I'd raised Lillian too, when her mother, my best friend Grace, couldn't. I changed diapers, braided her hair for school, sat through her teenage tantrums. I thought love was enough to make us family, but yesterday, standing in my own doorway, I saw the truth. To Lillian, I was just a house, a bank account, a thing to be managed. And Nathan, he was the kind of man who'd smile while slipping the knife in. I knew I had to protect myself, not just my heart, but my home, my savings, everything I'd built. Because if they were bold enough to parade a realtor through my living room while I was still breathing, they wouldn't stop there. So, I started small. I remembered a little voice recorder Lillian had given me years ago, back when she was still in college, saying I should write my memoirs someday. It was buried in a drawer of old chargers and mismatched earrings. I dug it out, dusted it off, and tested it. The red light blinked on, steady as a heartbeat. Good enough. The next time Lillian and Nathan came over, I was ready. They didn't knock, just walked in like they owned the place. Nathan's loafers squeaking on my floor, Lillian with her glossy handbag swinging like a trophy. I'd left the recorder in my purse, zipped half open on the coffee table, close enough to catch every word. "We're just worried about you, Mom," Lillian said, her voice all honey, like she was reading from a script. "You're getting older. What if you fall? What if you forget something important, like your meds?" I looked at her, my girl, the one who used to draw me pictures of sunflowers and tape them to the fridge. I asked, calm as I could, "When's the last time I forgot anything, Lillian?" She didn't answer, just gave me that smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes. Nathan jumped in, leaning forward like we were having a heart-to-heart. "We've been researching some places, Martha. Nice communities, you know, where people can look after you, just until we figure out what's best long-term." Long-term. That word hung in the air like a threat. I saw it then, clear as day. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were planning to push me out, to lock me away in some facility, to sell my house while I was still signing my own checks. I nodded, played along, offered them iced tea like the sweet old lady they thought I was. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice soft, my hands steady. They left, all smiles, thinking they'd won me over. The second the door clicked shut, I grabbed the recorder and played it back. Every word was there. Lillian's fake concern, Nathan's practiced sincerity, their whole plan laid out like a map to my erasure. I listened to it twice, then emailed the file to myself, saved it on a flash drive, and tucked it into a box of old recipe cards in the pantry, just in case. Then I called Evelyn. She's been my friend since nursing school, the one who'd seen me through Paul's death, through Lillian's rebellious years, through every storm. She didn't live far, just a few streets over in a little bungalow with a rose garden she tended like a child. I walked to her place that afternoon, the recorder still in my purse, and told her everything. How Lillian had stood in my home, planning my exit. How Nathan had talked about my backyard like it was already his. How they'd looked at me like I was already gone. Evelyn didn't interrupt, just poured us tea from her chipped blue pot and listened, her eyes sharp and steady. When I finished, she set her mug down and said, "Martha, they're not just greedy. They're dangerous." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a faded envelope, her hands moving slow, like she was handing me something heavy. "This came up a while back," she said, "when my sister was cleaning out Grace's things after the funeral. Grace, Lillian's mother, my best friend who'd lost herself to addiction and left her daughter to me." I opened the envelope and found a letter, written in Grace's loopy handwriting. It was addressed to Lillian, dated years ago, when she was just a teenager. It said things I'd never told her, that Grace was her real mother, that I was her godmother turned guardian, that I'd promised to love her like my own. My throat tightened. I'd kept that secret to protect Lillian, to give her a life free of her mother's pain. But Evelyn's next words hit harder. "Lillian found this years ago," she said. "My sister saw her reading it. She's known the truth since she was 16, Martha. She's known you're not her mother by blood." I sat there, the tea growing cold in my hands. Lillian had known. All those years, every hug, every "I love you, Mom," she'd known I was just the woman who'd stepped in. And still, she stood in my house, telling me I was done. Evelyn slid a business card across the table. "This is Judith Harper," she said. "She's a lawyer, specializes in elder law. Helped my cousin when her kids tried to pull something similar." I took the card, my fingers brushing the embossed letters. That night I called Judith. She didn't talk to me like I was some frail old woman. She listened, asked sharp questions, and told me to document everything, every visit, every word, every paper they tried to push in front of me. "Don't sign anything," she said, "and don't let them know you're fighting back." I went home and started a folder on my laptop, labeled Garden Plans so no one would look twice. Inside I saved the recording, scanned copies of my mortgage papers, my bank statements, anything that proved this house was mine. I checked my locks twice before bed, not because I was scared, but because I was awake now. Awake to the fact that the girl I'd raised wasn't just ungrateful, she was calculating. And if she and Nathan thought they could erase me, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The days after that talk with Evelyn, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just moved. Not my body, not yet, but my mind, my hands, my plans. I woke up each morning at 5, made my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the garden where Lillian used to chase fireflies as a kid. That girl was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as a hurdle to clear. But I wasn't going to let her and Nathan write the end of my story. I was going to write it myself. I started with the little things, the ones they wouldn't notice. My jewelry, box tucked in the back of my bedroom closet, held more than just keepsakes. There were pearls from my mother, a gold bracelet Paul gave me on our 10th anniversary, a few rings I hadn't worn in years but knew had value. I sorted them into 3 piles, the ones I wore often so Lillian wouldn't suspect, the sentimental, ones I'd never part with, like my wedding band, and the ones I could sell, quick and quiet. That last pile was bigger than I expected. I drove 2 towns over to a pawn shop I'd heard about from a nurse I used to work with, a place run by a woman named Vera, who didn't ask too many questions. She looked at the pearls, the rings, the bracelet, her eyes steady but kind. "You sure about this?" she asked, not out of judgment, just checking. I nodded, said I was starting fresh. She handed me an envelope of cash, thick enough to feel like a new beginning, and I walked out with nothing but a receipt and a weight off my chest. Back home, I kept moving. I went through the house, piece by piece, like I was taking inventory of my life. The dining table with Lillian's initials carved into it, too heavy to sell quietly, but the antique mirror in the hallway, the one Nathan always said was too fussy. That went on a private resale site, listed under a fake name I made up on the spot. Mary Delaney, my maiden name. I scheduled the pickup for a day I knew Lillian wouldn't drop by. The same went for the old oak bookshelf, the one holding Paul's medical journals. Lillian had always rolled her eyes at those, called them dusty relics. They sold in 2 days, no questions asked. Every time a piece left, I felt lighter, like I was peeling away their expectations, their greed. I didn't stop there. The safe, deposit box at the bank downtown, the one Lillian didn't even know existed, held more than just papers. There were savings bonds from when Paul and I were first married, a watch he'd worn every day at the hospital, a few letters we'd written, each other during his last deployment as a medic. I took them to Evelyn's house, locked in a small metal case, and asked her to keep it safe. She didn't ask why, just poured me tea and said, "You're doing what you need to, Martha." Her voice was steady, like she'd always known I had this fight in me. The biggest move was the house itself. I couldn't let them have it, not after they'd walked through it like it was already theirs. I called a realtor, not the one Nathan and Lillian had brought, but a woman named Susan, who worked solo and specialized in discreet sales. I found her through a church bulletin of all places, a little ad tucked between potluck announcements. Over coffee at a diner, I told her I wanted to sell my house, fast and quiet. No signs, no open houses, just serious buyers. She looked at me, her eyes searching but not prying, and nodded. "I get it," she said. "You want to move on your terms." I liked that she didn't treat me like some frail old lady. She treated me like a woman with a plan. By the end of the week, the house was listed under a coded ID, and Susan scheduled showings only when I was out, grocery runs, church, my weekly book club. I made sure the place looked the same when Lillian and Nathan visited. The quilt stayed on the armchair. The family photos stayed on the mantel, even though half the frames were empty now, the originals tucked away in my suitcase. I moved clothes out of my closet, a few at a time, donating some, packing others. The bookshelves were down to a few paperbacks I didn't care about, decoys to keep up appearances. They never noticed. They were too busy measuring walls, talking about renovations, acting like I was already a memory. But I wasn't done yet. I needed proof, something stronger than the recorder in my purse. Judith, my lawyer, had warned me they might try something worse than just talk. So I ordered a nanny cam online, a little thing disguised as a clock, small enough to sit on the mantel without drawing eyes. I set it up in the living room, angled to catch the whole space. And sure enough, they came back that Sunday, right after church. Lillian brought a store-bought apple pie, acting like she'd remembered it was my favorite when I'd always hated apples. Nathan was all smiles, talking about how concerned they were about me living alone. I played along, offered them coffee, kept my voice soft. But I was watching. When Lillian said she needed the bathroom, I saw the hallway light flicker on, the one with the motion sensor. I heard the faint creak of my medicine cabinet, the one I kept my blood pressure pills in. She didn't go to the bathroom. She went to my bedroom. Nathan kept talking, all loud and cheerful, like he was covering for her. When Lillian came back, she had this smug little smile, like she'd just won something. I didn't say a word, just smiled back, poured more coffee, and walked them to the door when they left. The second they were gone, I ran to my bedroom. The medicine cabinet door was slightly ajar, and when I checked my pill bottles, 3 of them had new labels, just a hair off, the dates expired. I held one up to the light, my hands steady from years of handling syringes and IVs. They weren't my pills. They'd swapped them, probably thinking I wouldn't notice, thinking they could make me seem confused, unsteady, like someone who needed to be taken care of. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because they were so obvious, so sure I was already fading. I pulled up the nanny cam footage on my laptop. There it was, clear as day. Lillian slipping into my room, opening the cabinet, swapping the bottles with a practiced ease, like she'd done it before. She even paused to check her reflection in my mirror, adjusting her hair like she was prepping for a performance. My stomach churned, not from fear, but from a kind of rage I hadn't felt in years, quiet, focused, like the calm before a storm. I saved the footage, backed it up on 2 flash drives, and emailed a copy to Judith with a subject line. "They've gone too far." Judith called within the hour, her voice sharp but calm. "This is evidence, Martha," she said. "Tampering with medication? That's elder abuse, plain and simple. We can get a restraining order if you want it." I told her not yet. I needed them to think I was still clueless, still a step behind. I needed time to finish what I'd started. By the end of the month, the house sale was nearly done. Susan found a buyer, a quiet couple looking to downsize who paid in full, no fuss. I transferred the money to a new trust account Judith helped me set up, one Lillian and Nathan couldn't touch, couldn't even find. I packed the last of my things, my wedding band, Paul's watch, a photo of Grace and me from nursing school, and moved to a small apartment 3 towns away, rented under my maiden name, Martha Delaney. No one knew, not even Evelyn, not yet. I wanted it that way. The day I left, I walked through the house one last time. The walls were bare now, the cabinets half empty, but it still looked like home, enough to fool Lillian and Nathan when they came by. I taped a note inside the kitchen cabinet, where I knew they'd find it eventually. "You forgot me while I was still alive. Now live with it." Then I locked the door, dropped the keys in my purse, and drove away. The house wasn't mine anymore. Not in my heart, not on paper. I was already gone, a ghost they didn't know they'd lost. And when they realized what I'd done, I'd be too far away for them to catch. I'd been in my new apartment for just a week when Evelyn called. Her voice was different, lower, like she was holding something heavy behind her words. "Martha, can you come over for tea?" she asked. "There's something you need to see." I didn't ask questions. I just grabbed my coat, slipped on my loafers, and walked a few blocks to her bungalow, the autumn leaves crunching under my feet. The air felt crisp, new, like the world was waiting for me to catch up. But deep down, I knew whatever Evelyn had for me was going to change things again. When I got there, her living room was the same as always. Rose-patterned curtains, a tabby cat curled up in the corner, the faint smell of lavender from her candles. But there, on her coffee table, sat a manila envelope, plain and unassuming, like it was just waiting for me to open it. Evelyn poured tea, her hands steady but her eyes cautious, and slid the envelope toward me. "You deserve to know everything before you go any further," she said. Her words hit me like a quiet warning, and I realized I hadn't told her I'd moved yet. Not officially. But Evelyn always knew things, like she could feel the shift in me. I opened the envelope slowly. my fingers brushing the worn edges. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter yellowed with age, in Grace's handwriting. My heart caught in my throat. Grace, my best friend from nursing school, Lillian's mother, gone too soon because the world was harder on her than she could bear. The letter was addressed to Lillian, written when she was just a girl, maybe 12 or 13. It laid out everything I'd kept buried. That Grace was her real mother, that I'd taken her in when Grace couldn't, that I'd promised to love her like my own. I'd kept that secret to protect Lillian, to give her a life free of the weight of her mother's struggles. I thought it was the right thing. Then Evelyn spoke, her voice soft but sharp. Lillian found this letter when she was 16, Martha. My sister caught her reading it in Grace's old room back when we were clearing out her things. She's known the truth all this time. She's known you're not her mother by blood. The room went still. The tea sat untouched, steam curling into the air. Lillian had known. For years she'd called me Mom, hugged me, let me believe we were family, all while knowing I was just the woman who'd stepped in. And yet she stood in my house, telling me I was done, planning to take everything I'd built. The betrayal wasn't new, but this was deeper, like a knife twisting. In a wound I thought I'd bandaged. Lillian hadn't just forgotten me. She'd used my love, my promise to Grace, as a tool to get what she wanted. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just folded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, and tucked it into my purse. Thank you, I told Evelyn, my voice steady. She reached across the table, her hand resting on mine. You're doing the right thing, she said, but don't carry this alone. That night, I sat in my new apartment, the envelope on the kitchen counter, staring at me like it had a pulse. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. The truth was clear now, and it made everything sharper, like a fog lifting. Lillian wasn't just greedy. She was calculating, playing a long game with my heart. And I knew, without a doubt, that I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting for my name, my story, the woman who'd given everything to a girl who'd never seen her as enough. The next morning, I called Judith, my lawyer. I told her about the letter, about Lillian's betrayal, about the footage of her swapping my pills. Judith's voice was calm but firm. We've got more than enough now, Martha, she said. The recordings, the video, the lease documents you sent me, they can't touch you legally. But we need to update your will. Make it ironclad. I didn't hesitate. Cut her out, I said. All of it. No warning, no explanation. We met at Judith's office that afternoon. I wore my best cardigan, the one I saved for church, and brought every piece of evidence we'd gathered. The audio files of Lillian's fake concern, the nanny cam footage of her tampering with my medication, the scanned mortgage papers proving the house was mine. Judith spread it all out on her desk, her eyes scanning each document like a surgeon assessing a patient. This is elder abuse, she said. And with the medication tampering, it's criminal. You could press charges if you wanted. I thought about it, but I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I wanted to finish this my way. So we drafted a new will. I cut Lillian out completely, not even a token dollar. Instead, I set up a trust to fund a community health clinic in Grace's name. Grace, who'd fought so hard to be a mother but lost to her demons. She deserved to be remembered for more than a closed casket and a broken promise. The rest of my savings went to my church, to the hospital where I'd worked for 30 years, and to Evelyn, who'd never once treated me like a burden. As Judith typed up the final clauses, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not grief, but a kind of peace, like closing a book I'd been carrying too long. We locked the will in her fireproof cabinet, made 3 copies, one for her, one for me, one to be mailed only when I gave the word. I walked out of her office into the late afternoon sun, my steps lighter than they'd been in years. The house sale had closed the day before, the money safely tucked into the trust account, untraceable to Lillian or Nathan. They had no idea. They were still visiting my old house, still talking about paint colors, still thinking they'd won. But then the storm came. 2 weeks after I settled into my new apartment, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox, no return address, just my name scrawled across the front, Martha Reynolds. I knew what it was before I opened it. The letterhead read, Reynolds versus Reynolds, and my heart didn't even skip. Lillian and Nathan were suing me, claiming emotional distress, financial sabotage, and, here's the kicker, that I'd been manipulated into selling my house by outside parties, meaning Judith and Evelyn. They even had the nerve to say I was mentally unstable, pointing to the nanny cam as proof I was paranoid, spying on my own family. They left out the part where Lillian swapped my pills, of course, the part where they'd planned to paint, me as senile to take everything. I read their claims, their carefully worded lies, and I didn't flinch. I'd expected this. Judith had too. She'd filed a counterclaim the same day, citing elder abuse, fraud, and attempted medical manipulation. The nanny cam footage, the audio recordings, the forged lease papers they'd tried to slip through, all of it was already with the court. I didn't even need to testify. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. Adult Protective Services got involved, opening an investigation into Lillian and Nathan for coercion and exploitation. I didn't have to lift a finger when the news reached Lillian's circle, her church group, her book club, the neighbors she loved to impress. It spread like wildfire. Judith made sure the footage was filed publicly, part of the court record, and people started whispering. Lillian and Nathan tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but the truth has a way of sticking. They'd lost not just the house, but the facade they'd built. And me? I was already gone, sipping tea in my new apartment, watching the leaves fall outside my window, feeling more alive than I had in years. The first morning in my new apartment, I woke up to the sound of birds outside my window. Not the loud kind, just a soft chirping, like they were welcoming me to this new chapter. The place was small, just a one-bedroom with a tiny balcony, but it was mine. No echoes of Lillian's voice, no shadow of Nathan's plans. Just me, a pot of coffee, and a view of a quiet street where neighbors waved as they walked their dogs. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I was 68, a retired nurse who'd spent her life fixing other people's broken pieces. But now, I was learning to fix my own. I started small, the way you do when you're rebuilding. I joined the community garden down the block, where folks my age gathered to plant tomatoes and swap stories about their grandkids. I volunteered at the local health clinic, the one I'd named in my will for Grace. It wasn't much, just taking blood pressures, chatting with patients, but it reminded me of who I used to be, before Lillian and Nathan made me feel like I was fading. I didn't look over my shoulder anymore, didn't check my locks twice, or jump at the sound of a car pulling into the lot. The nanny cam was packed away, the flash drives locked in a safe at Evelyn's house. I'd left my old life behind, but not the lessons. Those I carried with me, tucked into the corners of my heart, like the letters Paul and I used to write. And one evening, sitting on my balcony with a glass of iced tea, I started writing it all down. Not for revenge, not for pity, but because I knew I wasn't the only one. If this could happen to me, a woman who'd given everything to a child, she raised as her own, it could happen to anyone. I didn't call it a story. I called it notes, scribbled in a spiral notebook I kept by my bed. Every night, I'd add a little more. How Lillian's words had cut me, how I'd found the swap pills, how I'd walked away from the house I loved. It wasn't easy, putting it on paper. Some nights, I'd stop and stare at the page, remembering the way Lillian used to cling to my hand at the park, her little fingers sticky from ice cream. But then I'd think of that letter, the one she'd read at 16, the one that told her I wasn't her mother by blood. She'd known, and she'd still chosen to erase me. That made it easier to keep writing. When I finished, I typed it up on the old laptop I'd bought for the move. I didn't plan to do anything with it at first, but during a book club meeting at the community center, one of the women mentioned a local newsletter that published stories from people like us, folks, who'd lived long enough to have something to say. They took anonymous submissions, no names, no spotlight. I sent my notes in, not expecting much, just hoping maybe one person would read it and feel less alone. A month later, I got an email from the editor. My story had been shared over 100 times, passed around in church groups, senior centers, even a few legal forums for elder rights. It wasn't viral, nothing flashy like that, but it was enough. People were reading it, nodding along, seeing themselves in the words. One woman at the clinic mentioned it in passing, said it reminded her of her aunt, how her kids had tried to push her into a home. I just smiled, said it sounded familiar, and kept watering the marigolds in the garden. Then one quiet afternoon, an email popped up in my inbox. No subject, just Lillian's name in the sender line. My heart didn't race, didn't sink. I just opened it like I was opening a bill. It was short, her words careful, like she'd written and rewritten them. "Mom, I'm sorry," it started. "I got caught up in wanting a future for us, and I lost sight of you. I know I messed up. Can we talk?" I read it twice, maybe 3 times, looking for something real, something that felt like the girl I'd raised, but all I could see was her standing in my kitchen, saying I was done, her smile cold as she planned my exit. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I just closed the laptop and went out to my balcony where the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I thought about Grace, about the promise I'd made to love her daughter like my own. I'd kept that promise every day, through every sacrifice, but Lillian had made her choice, and I wasn't going to let her pull me back into a story that wasn't mine anymore. I chose me. I kept living day by day, finding joy in the small things. The way the garden smelled after rain, the laughter of the women at book club when we argued over novels. The quiet pride of knowing the clinic in Grace's name was helping people who needed it. I wasn't defined by what I'd lost or who'd betrayed me. I was Martha, sometimes Miss Reynolds to the kids who came by the clinic, sometimes just Martha, to the neighbors who left zucchini on my doorstep, and that was enough. My story, those notes I'd written, kept spreading, slow and steady, like ripples in a pond. I got a letter from a woman in Ohio saying she'd read it at her church group and started checking her own bank accounts just in case. Another from a man in Oregon saying he'd bought a recorder after reading it to protect himself from his stepkids. I didn't write back, didn't need to. Knowing they were out there trusting their gut was enough. And here's what I've learned, what I want you to carry with you. Trust isn't just a gift you give. It's a choice you make every day. When it's broken, when someone you love decides you're just a means to an end, you don't have to stay in their story. You can walk away, not out of anger, but out of love for yourself. You can build a life that's yours, brick by brick, even if it's smaller, quieter than the one you planned. And when you do, you'll find there's a strength in you that no one can take. Not your house, not your heart, not your name. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever felt like you're fading in someone else's eyes, know this: you're not done. You're just beginning. Trust that and keep going. And that's my story. Not just the pain of it or the fight, but the part that matters most. The part where I learned I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I'm Marcia, just a woman who thought she'd lost everything, only to find she had so much left to give herself. If you're still here, listening to this, Maybe you felt it too. That sting of being pushed aside, of being told your time's up by someone you loved. Maybe you're wondering if you're strong enough to push back. Let me tell you something. You are. You've got more in you than they'll ever see, and you don't have to prove it to anyone but yourself. I shared this story because I know I'm not alone. There's someone out there, maybe sipping coffee in a quiet kitchen, maybe staring at a phone, wondering if they're imagining things. If that's you, trust your gut. Write it down. Save that receipt. Call that friend who listens. You don't have to fight loud to fight smart. And if you've got a story like mine, something that's weighed on you, kept you up at night, I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from, what you've been through, what got you to the other side, because we're not just telling stories here. We're building a community, a place where we see each other or where we remind each other we're not done. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Every story we share is a step toward healing, not just for us, but for someone else out there who needs to know they can keep going. You're not alone. You're not done. And I'm rooting for you every single step of the way.